Hey, you a communist sympathizer?
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of the Sympathizer episode 4. Give us some good lines. Patrick Klepek, what do you think overall of this episode?
It's a great episode. It's a real swerve. Like, kind of feels like I don't know. Like, I don't know what the plot of this show is at this point. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what the arc of these characters are. But like, there's such a confidence and almost a swagger to the storytelling that I'm really enjoying. It's just again, this episode remarkably balances drama and comedy in ways that could be highly distasteful and offensive if done without, I think, the expertise and the sensitivity that's on display here. And it's a true joy to watch the show continue operating this way, because I started our episode going, well, I don't know what we're doing this episode. And by the end, you're like, well, I'm glad we did that. So just a truly fascinating piece of entertainment.
I think if I had to sum up this episode, it would be F Apocalypse Now, or screw Apocalypse Now. Like, I haven't read the book, but I imagine watching a movie like Apocalypse Now, seeing all the praise and acclaim it gets, despite how highly problematic it is. I can understand if you just want to be like, I'm going to write a chapter talking about how Apocalypse Now is terrible, and I fully support that. That's great that we revisit this. Of course, in the show, it's not Apocalypse Now. It's a fictional film called The Hamlet that's directed by somebody named Nico, played by Robert Downey Jr. But I agree 100% with everything you said, in the sense that I think this episode by itself is amazing. Mm-hmm. It has so much to say about how different cultures are presented, how culture is made, how challenging it is to get authentic depictions of non-white people on screen, specifically not even non-white people, Asian people on screen in American media. But also, you're right that what is this show even doing at this point? Like, what are we doing? Like, what is the point of any of this? Where is it going? Because this is a real detour in terms of what the show was up to prior to now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows? That said, I thought this was an amazing. I loved this episode so much. There's several sections where I rewatched it multiple times because I was like, that is such a good portion of the episode. Or a good section of the episode. And anyway, highly recommend the Sympathizer episode 4. Give us some good lines. Let's talk about what actually happens in this episode. This episode begins with the captain meeting with writer-director Nico, played by Robert Downey Jr., to discuss the script for The Hamlet, the Vietnam-based film that he's shooting. The captain is the cultural advisor of the film, and he suggests maybe giving the Vietnamese character some lines. But the director is really not into it. He's into the raw nature of war. No words, only emotions. We got to start by saying, in my opinion, Patrick Klepek, this is the best Robert Downey Jr. character of the 4 characters, because it's the one I think that seems the closest to who he actually is in real life, and therefore seems like less of a put on. That's my opinion. What do you think, Patrick Klepek?
Yeah, if some actors have sort of a core like character they seem to be playing in a lot of their work, and then they deviate, left and right, like based on what the character is asked to do. This feels like the most, like, when you conjure in your mind,
right,
Robert Downey Jr. and like the kinds of characters he plays, like a lot of him is in this, and so it feels the most authentic relative to, I don't have to do any jumping through hoops. I don't have to like suspend my disbelief at all. It actually, weirdly, despite the fact that it's the truest to Downey as I've seen him in other work, it's the least amount of work as a viewer that I've had to do to just be drawn into the character, because I am not distracted by the costuming, the racism, like the weird accents. And I think all that works to differing degrees, but it was actually sort of nice to just, he's a great actor. And I think many of the things that go awry with the characters he's being asked to play really have less to do with him as much as what he's being asked to do relative to what he is capable of as an actor and the context in which it's being dropped. But here just feels like I'm sinking in with a terrific Downey performance that does like feel informed by the Tropic Thunder of it all. Like it certainly feels like there are like elements of that film being pulled upon in what's happening over the arc of this episode. But yeah, I'm with you broadly. Like this is the best that he's been in the show, and weirdly because it's the most authentic to the original Downey.
Right. Like, well, when you see him talk, like this is like very similar. He's not as big of a pretentious asshole as this character is, but it's like he's kind of on that spectrum. He's, in that direction in terms of just his cadence and tone and style. So
it's like, if you've seen Oppenheimer, like that is the most subdued version of this kind of like Downey performance. And then here you have it, dialed up to 11.
Yeah. Yeah. This scene is great. And throughout the episode, there's all this commentary on why Asian characters get short shrift in Hollywood, right? That's kind of the thesis of the episode. And this part of the episode shows you that, it's because like directors, A, they don't think Asian characters are that important or deserve speaking lines, but B, they kind of cloak it in these big ideas of, like we don't need words. Like it's all about, I want the feeling, not the words, all this like, all these big ideas, these grandiloquent ideas. And I thought it was just like a very smart way of tackling that. My favorite part of the scene was when he says mise en scène, like he calls it. He's talking about mise en scène, which is how you pronounce it in French, but he says mise en scène. So it's like, well, this guy has no idea what the heck he's talking about. And it's just an amazing depiction of how like oblivious and pretentious and up his own ass this guy is. Anyway, everyone in the captain's camp agrees that he should go work on this movie to represent his people. But given that he is a Viet Cong infiltrator, he's going to try to put in lines that honor his communist comrades. In the meantime, the general's daughter stows away in his car and smuggles herself onto the set. At the shoot, they meet the cast. By the way, amazing cast for this episode. Like you have like these actors who would headline a TV show, just showing up for like one episode on The Sympathizer, right? James Yoon is a fictional actor in the universe of The Sympathizer. He's played by John Cho in the show. And Captain Seamus is played by David Duchovny, who is super method. Plus, there's an actor named Jamie Johnson, played by Maxwell Whittington Cooper. He is a TV star and singer. So at the sort of opening party, the launch party for the movie The Hamlet, Nico gives a speech about the film and how it will be an anti-war masterpiece and how it's great they were able to make it on the studio's dime. Couple thoughts in reaction to this whole setup. My mind was blown that David Duchovny was
same. I was so glad I didn't. He turns his head around.
Yeah, it's like,
I'm like, are you
what?
We were just talking about X-Files on our podcast, and then David Duchovny just shows up. He also just doesn't act as much these days. He had a long run. I forget that television show that he was on Showtime for a very long time. And Californication, yes. And it's not that he doesn't still appear in, but he's pretty picky. He's clearly...
He's not like a ubiquitous actor that's in everything.
No, so when he shows up in something, it's like, God damn, like David Duchovny is here. Like, it feels like a treat because he's just not acting as much these days. And he is... he's such a joy when, like, you compare what he's good at. Like, kind of... He's a really good, like... smarmy asshole, and then that's his dial that he kind of like rotates. Californication like takes it all the way to like asshole status, and then X-Files is like there's a boyish charm to his like arrogance and smarminess, and here is just a delightful take on that character that he plays.
Yeah, I mean, there's many references to Apocalypse Now throughout the whole episode of like. And one of them is obviously Marlon Brando played Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now and famously is super duper intense. So like, I think that's a reference to that. Both Apocalypse Now and this movie, The Hamlet, end with massive explosion, fire kind of stuff. Like there's all these things that like let you understand kind of what movie is being referred to without saying the movie Apocalypse Now. But there's a couple things that this scene brought up that I wanted to discuss. First of all, I enjoyed the delusion of Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Nico, saying like, oh, this is good. Like, people will see this movie and they will realize the evil brutality of war, that kind of thing. And it reminded me of Francois Truffaut's statement of how there's no such thing as an anti-war movie. And how the aesthetics of war movies, the common tropes of war movies, like are in some ways inherently attractive or thrilling, and that therefore like it's really difficult to depict war in such a way that is truly anti-war, because you get a rush out of it just watching a war movie, and therefore like there's something like there's a tension between the desire of a filmmaker to make something that is anti-war and then the film itself. And I honestly think this does apply to a movie like Apocalypse Now. But Patrick Klepek, any thoughts on any of that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this comes up a lot in
video
games
yeah.
as well, where you can have, if you're going to make a shooter that has a message, it's like anti-war, anti-violence,
right?
It's like, well, what are you going to do? Make the shooting part feel real bad?
Yeah, right. I remember Grand Theft Auto 4 was like this. The story was this very somber tale about this immigrant trying to remake his life after he had lived a life of crime. Meanwhile, it's called Grand Theft Auto 4. You're doing crimes all the time, and it's fun to do so, right?
Right, and there's a term that was coined around the Uncharted game specifically called ludonarrative dissonance, and the idea there is, so Uncharted is like, oh, this plucky guy who's just going on an adventure, and like he doesn't really want to kill these people, but by the end, Nathan Drake has killed thousands, and he has seen the horrors of murder and violence in order to get his Indiana Jones. It's like doing the Indiana Jones thing, and Indiana Jones does kill some people along the way, but his body count's pretty low because it's a movie, because it can be calculated. When you do that in a video game that's 18 hours long, the body count is in the hundreds and the thousands. And so like, how can you possibly portray this like naive, upbeat character when they are choking the life out of so many people? And I think there's a similar tension at play here, where like you may be trying to achieve a certain message, but the mere medium itself like is in tension with trying to achieve that kind of message.
Yeah, totally. And I'd argue that's the case of the overwhelmingly vast majority of war films, but people might disagree. This scene brought to mind was the idea of method acting, because David Duchovny plays an actor who stays in character the whole time. So he's like this psychotic captain in the movie The Hamlet. And it did remind me of something that Kirsten Dunst said recently while promoting Civil War. She gave this interview to GQ where...
Amazing interview. There's like 9 quotable Dunst moments in that interview. She is in her don't give an F phase, and I am here for it.
The interviewer comments on how she's never tried method acting, and she said, "quote What am I going to be like that with my kids when I come home, speaking in an accent? Like, honestly, I can't do that. It seems like something only men can afford to do." End quote. Which
wasn't there was an anti-method acting. There was also that on Succession, right? Where
Brian Cox talked about Jeremy Strong's
constantly being like, look at this clown. Like, what is he doing?
Right. I think I've really come full circle or 180, I should say, on the method acting, where when I was young, I kind of looked up to people who would Daniel Day-Lewis and people who stay in character. Oh my God, the commitment to the art. When I was young, this is like, I'm talking about like when I was in high school or whatever. It's like, oh wow, the commitment to the art, blah, blah, blah. And then I get older and it's like, those people are kind of just being assholes. Like they're kind of just being they're kind of just making it hard for their collaborators to work with them. And it's very gendered too. Like 99% of the time, it's men who are doing the method acting. And you rarely hear about women doing the method acting.
I was going to say, can you even, you would know better than me, but can you even think of one off the top of your head that like actively talks about that on a regular basis as their form of performing characters?
When you Google women method actors, the first article is headline: Natalie Portman calls method acting a luxury that women can't afford and has never tried it. So
case closed. Case closed.
So it's like very gendered, because I think the idea is the fundamental idea is that society is more permissive,
right,
of white men specifically, and them being assholes, and that women, people of color, like they can't try that shit because they will be fired more easily.
Someone would tell them to shut the fuck up and stop.
Yeah, or not even tell them. Just be like, you're off the set. Goodbye.
Right.
You're fired. And so, yeah, I have I've really come a long way in terms of my perception of method acting, and I felt like David Duchovny being in this uh, episode was like a great depiction of that. Final thought on this: there's so much to unpack in this episode, but I'll just say this last thing. John Cho plays his character named James Yoon, and in the television episode, he makes a couple comments. First of all, he says this is the first time he can play a Korean American, which I thought was interesting. Like often there are these like legendary actors in Hollywood that are like there's like the Asian actors basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were the dudes that were in everything. James Hong is an example. He was in Everything Everywhere All at Once. He has like hundreds of credits to his name. But the idea is like, if you could be the Asian guy, then you were if you were going to be the Asian guy in one movie, you could be the Asian guy in movies. And this is during the era when that was the case, right? Like there was one Asian guy, and anytime there was an Asian guy in a movie, they'd use that one Asian guy. Also, the Asian guy would often die. that was another common trope in these things, and I just love that the episode found a way to comment on all that stuff. Sometimes very explicitly, but I appreciate that it put that out there. So anyway. Wanted to mention that, but let's move on. We see various scenes of the shoot. The production designer shows the captain the village, and he's quite moved by its verisimilitude. The director realizes none of the background actors are Vietnamese, quite embarrassingly. So the captain is forced to mobilize all the immigrants that he knows to appear on set and appear in the film. And also we see James Yoon's characters tortured to death. And when the crew watches the dailies, everyone is impressed. Before we get to the end of the episode, anything else you want to mention about the shoot or anything else you saw this episode, Patrick Klepek?
One thing I think the episode does quite well is actually give you a sense of the production of a film, weirdly, even though that's not necessarily, I don't know, maybe that's what it's trying to do, but I think it actually does a pretty decent job of balancing like these characters moving forward in a story and also a sense of what it's like to make a movie, like the kinds of details that you like. It's a lot of this is viewed through the lens of like, for example, like not casting actual Vietnamese actors, but yes, that's a really like horrific, like extreme example. But my guess is all sorts of details like that, happen on a set, and people are in charge of, in theory, capturing those things or like tracking those things. And I found that part of the episode to be, just kind of interesting. I thought that was like an interesting window into the set of a film as much as it was, advancing the arc of these characters that we're following.
I would say that the depiction of the AD feels very accurate. The assistant director, like what that guy is responsible for, and not necessarily what he's responsible for, because he might not necessarily be responsible for extras, but like the way that he interacts with the director and like what he's expected to take care of, I thought was kind of interesting. I was shocked at how progressive this set was, Patrick Klepek, because I would expect a set back then to be like, oh yeah, can you just make it sound Vietnamese? And like, that's the end of the conversation. And then they make the Chinese actors into Vietnamese actors, and that's how it ends. Because that's frequently how it's done. That movie Memoirs of a Geisha came out in 2005, so it's like Hollywood did not care about authenticity for a very, very long time.
Yeah. So, I wonder if that is one of the, like, because it's made in the modern era that right. Like some of that just bleeds over. I don't know. I'd be curious to see why, like, how the depiction of how was there a dedication to depicting reality versus like, this is what these, I don't know. You're right. That's an interesting choice for something that probably is not how that would have actually taken place.
Right. Basically, I'm saying Nico Damianos, yes, he's made some mistakes.
Problematic, but
at least he gave a shit about whether or not they were actually Vietnamese, so I appreciated that. All right. The episode culminates when Nico decides to write a rape scene featuring a woman named after the captain's mom, played by Lana. The captain disagrees with this decision and is fired after having an argument with Nico. While they're shooting the scene, the captain fears that Seamus is going to take his role too seriously and actually assault Lana. He storms onto set during the take, ruining the most important scene of the film and alienating Lana in the process. The episode ends with the captain getting blown up during a spectacular explosion on the set as we cut to the future and see the captain in present day recounting the story to a North Vietnamese commander. So that's how the episode ends. I thought there was a lot going on here in terms of how sexual assault is often used in these movies, right? It's like a plot device, or it's interesting backstory for a female character, but it's rarely given the full attention that such a traumatizing event would deserve. Uh, Speaking of realism on the set, though, Patrick Klepek, I know accidents happen, but before you're about to blow up an entire town, like I would think you would make sure you clear the set and have copious announcements and triple, quadruple check there's no one there. I don't know.
Well, it's especially contrasted to a scene earlier in the episode where David Duchovny goes off set to go, track down, like goes off with a gun that they're not sure is loaded. And they're like, it's a big point of emphasis made of like, stay on set. Yeah. Don't wander around.
Yeah, don't wander around. Yeah,
and contrast that with we're about to drop some bombs. I can understand. I think the way the episode is trying to depict, I think, is that those calls did happen. People were supposed to be cleared, and he still found his way on there because of, I don't know, being guided by his emotions to having a moment.
That part was pretty hilarious, and you're wondering like what's going to happen with Seamus. Like, is he going to actually hurt someone? And he shows up with a deer, and it's like, oh, okay, all right, that's
sure I get it, but okay, sure, fits the character.
Yeah, that's probably going to be okay. But yeah, so at the end of the day, like some really interesting commentary, like how movies are made, how these kinds of movies are made, the challenges in making these kinds of movies, the challenges in keeping them culturally accurate, and it's pretty funny how like the captain is trying to put in all these lines about like how amazing the communists are, but like no one knows what the characters are saying. So, and there's these scenes where like one of the actors says, "I'm not going to say that garbage that you told me to say," and then Robert Downey Jr. is like, "Keep it. That take is going in the movie," and it's like, okay, well,
that's we as we discussed, like the surprisingly regressive director. It's like he is if he's aware of how it might look, like, oh, this makes me look bad, but if he doesn't know what those characters are saying. If he doesn't know, well, then who cares? We'll just move on with the film because he doesn't actually want his consultant to translate it. Because if he hears it, then maybe he has to shoot it again and get something else in the film. But if the take seems good enough, then move on to the next thing. Because, especially in that era, like, who's going to translate that and get that feedback to him? You know what I mean? Like, this isn't the internet where Vulture is going to do a write-up.
You can use your Google Translate on it. You can't.
Right. It seems that seems the kind of thing that shows up in an art, academic book later, analyzing the film as opposed to something.
In the 3-hour YouTube video essay about the Hamlet, they would say like, "Did you know that the Vietnamese actors aren't actually saying any lines that are relevant?"
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I thought one of my favorite parts of this episode that gives you insight into the filmmaking process is when Captain Seamus, David Duchovny's character, is giving Jamie's character a really hard time about everything. Like, you're not limping correctly. Your posture is incorrect. And Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Nico, is saying, "Hey, can you trust me? Like, can you trust me on this one? Let's do this and move on." And it's always like a negotiation because if any one of your main actors decides, "Hey, I don't believe in this project anymore," then it can really spiral downward very quickly, and I appreciated that even somebody as pretentious and as stuck up as Nico still needs to navigate these egos. Like he understands, he's not just being like, "You're doing it my way or the highway." He's like, "Hey, I need to make sure Captain Seamus is happy with his take, or else the movie's going to be bad," right? And he at least gets that much. So anyway, just a lot of great little moments throughout the whole episode. So yeah, anything else? Really weird ending for the episode. Like we know the captain's not dead. Like why end it that way? It's.
I think this is. I think this is an instance of the multiple timelines of the show creating or like reducing some of the tension that it might be able to generate if it wasn't flashing and going back between these different things. I mean, but also like this is the main character. Like he's not dying in episode 4. Like, so I that didn't bother me too much as it's just at times it can be difficult to just as a viewer, like emotionally, where am I supposed to be with this character? Because I'm getting different versions of how the story is being told. Like it's not even just, him telling it in the future, recounting it, but also we're getting like first person narration where he's telling well, I wasn't in the scene, but like this is how I think the scene went, like, which isn't something we talked about, but was like a really kind of neat trick that they deployed a couple of times in this episode. But it's a show that can be a little difficult. It requires you paying attention a little more than usual because of the way it's handling timelines, like past, present, future. It can get a little tricky to get a handle on.
But overall, great episode, very solid. The Sympathizer, one of the best shows on TV that very few people I know are actually watching. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.